Did you know you can paint stained wood furniture and not have to sand off the finish first? If you are brand new to painting furniture, are scared to tackle a project, or didn't know you can paint stained wood furniture without sanding off the finish first, you're in the right place. In this extremely beginner-friendly, detailed class, I'm going to hold your hand and walk you through everything you need to know. Hi there, I'm Tracy, also known as Porch Daydreamer, and I'm the queen of painting everything. Not only am I a veteran of the paint industry, I also have an architectural coating technologist certification, which means not only do I know how to paint, but the science behind it. So my 3-step process is going to get you the most durable, beautiful results. And before we head into class, if you need any help choosing paint colors, please check out my free class linked in the description below, where I teach you how to avoid the foremost common mistakes picking out paint colors and how to do it the right way the first time. All right, I'll see you in class.
So I just wanted to go through the few supplies that you need to get ready. First of all, we want to protect our floor. Obviously, we don't want to get any paint on the floor, so you can do that with a variety of things. Obviously, I love my Amazon cardboard. You could do multiple pieces of cardboard flattened out. I've got this nice furniture blanket. It's going to be a little bit more comfortable for me to sit on, but you can use painter's plastic, really anything. If you have anything behind you, like say a couch is behind the thing that you're painting, you want to make sure that you protect that surface. Also, just to be safe, we are going to be needing scissors. Because I've got to kneel a lot because I'm going to be painting a chair, I've got a little kneeler that I'm going to use. The other thing is a microfiber cloth, some gloss off, and what I do, because I buy it in industrial sizes, is I put it in a little spray bottle. Next, I'm going to show you how I'm going to tape around the areas that I don't want to paint, and also how I'm going to protect the seat from any paint drips or splatters. We're just going to use 2 things, which is painter's tape and painter's plastic. So I'm going to go get my chair, bring it over here, and show you how it's done. I'm going to show you some just general taping techniques. The 2 things that I'm going to be using are blue painter's tape, painter's plastic, because I need to make sure that I don't get any paint on the woven surface of my chair. But what I want to show you is I'm literally going to turn this painter's tape on its side because I want to make sure I get exactly in between the wood and the woven parts of the chair itself. And I'm going to use my fingernail to push it down and make sure it's completely secure. And the main thing is you want to make sure your painter's tape is not on the surface that you're painting. That makes sense, right? Because when you pull it off, you will then expose the surface underneath that you really don't want to see. I'm not going to have you watch me do this completely, but what I'm going to do is show you some close-ups of exactly what I did to cover up all of the woven areas. Hopefully you don't have a complicated situation like I do, where you have to tape off so many different areas. But what I want to tell you is truly turning tape to the side and wiggling it in between things is the best way to ensure that you cover up all the areas that you want protected with that tape.
I want you to see how I ran the tape down in between. So you see how careful I was to make sure that everything is fully protected with the blue tape.
The next thing we're going to do is we're going to be using some painter's plastic that we're going to cut, and I'm going to cover up my seat. So if you have an area on your furniture that you need to do that, we can talk about that a little bit. If not, you can totally skip over this part, and we're going to talk about how to clean and get the furniture ready next. Okay, so when you're cutting painter's plastic, actually, the widest part is when you pull it apart, and how tall it's going to be is how tall it's going to be when you cut it here. So obviously with this chair not being very big, I'm going to make sure I cut my painter's plastic not very tall because I don't want to waste it. And I'm just going to lay it over in sections and cut it to fit the areas that I want to cover. So see, that is as wide as I need it, and then we're going to tape down the painter's plastic actually onto the painter's tape that I've already applied. And that way you don't use too much plastic and get everything secured. So I'm just going to cut this to size, and the main thing is I want to make sure that when I get this painter's plastic on here, I'm going to tape everything down nice and secure, because I don't want any of this flipping up and interfering with when I start priming. So just be mindful of that if you're doing any painter's plastic. I'm gonna go ahead and finish this up, and we'll be back in a little bit and I'll show you what it looks like. So you can see I have fully protected the seat of my chair. It's wrapped completely in plastic. Everything's taped down nice and secure to get ready to apply Gloss Off. And you can see obviously that I'm wearing some gloves, and the reason I do that is, number one, this is a chemical, so I want to protect my skin. And ladies, if you have a manicure, it's going to take your fingernail polish off. But really, Gloss Off is super easy. I have only been able to find it recently in this really large size. So I put everything in this little handy dandy spray bottle, and then I use a microfiber rag, which is the most important thing I have to say to you, because don't use anything else, because we want to make sure we don't leave any dust or debris behind. You know, honestly, I feel like spraying onto the rag, you have a whole lot more control of how much Gloss Off you're applying, and really you can't over apply it, but I typically spray it in my rag and get the rag nice and damp. And then we're just going to rub it on to the furniture itself. This can be used on a painted surface or a polyurethane surface, really anything. And what it's designed to do is just knock down the sheen of whatever it is that you're painting. It's kind of my secret sauce before I prime, because it's going to help us get the best adhesion. You don't realize, you know, people's hands leave grease and oils on surfaces. You know, every time I move these chairs, getting them taped and putting the plastic on, I'm leaving just a little residue behind. That's the other benefit of having on gloves, is I'm not going to redeposit any of that grease or oil. So you're just going to rub that in, and just be mindful, if you want to go over everything twice, it's not going to hurt. And what's kind of cool, this is the last thing that we're doing on day one. Some of the stain is actually coming off on this glove as I'm rubbing this. So that means that this really isn't a very sound finish. And so it's good that I'm doing the Gloss Off. Once this Gloss Off dries, so you can see it's kind of wet right now, that as it dries, you can see that finish get like a little duller and tackier. And that's what we want. It softens the finish just a little bit to help the primer adhere better to the surface. So the deglosser is complete on this chair. We are going to let our deglosser dry for exactly 10 minutes. That's all it takes. If you want to stop here today and pick up on day 2 of the challenge, you can. Or if you're raring to go, wait 10 minutes, put a little timer on your phone to make sure you've let it dry long enough. As you can see, I've got gloves on because I feel like it's important to protect your hands when you're applying bonding primer. If you don't have any, it will wash off, but it is tough stuff and it will stick to your hands and your nails, and you're gonna have to scrub. The other thing is, I highly recommend investing in an old pair of pants that you have in your closet and make them your painting pants. Yes, these are old hip hugger, bell bottom, tight pants from 10 years ago that I'll never wear out in public. I just wear them to paint. And obviously wear a shirt that you don't mind getting any paint on, because sometimes you'll just lean into something and all of a sudden it happens. I actually happen to have painting shoes because I do a lot of painting that I've got some sneakers that I don't care if I get paint on those. So make sure you are protecting everything around your body. The other supplies that we're gonna need today, I'm gonna be exclusively brushing because I feel like so many people are so concerned about brush marks, so I want to show you exactly how to apply with a brush so you can eliminate as many brush marks as possible. The other supplies we're going to need is a stir stick, because we're going to make sure we stir up our bonding primer really well before we ever apply it. To open up the can, you need a little paint can opener. And then a thing that I find helpful is my handy paint pail. It comes with a liner, and you can buy these online. And then the other really cool thing about the paint pail is it has a little magnetic catch in it, so I can put my brush in there. So as I wipe off the bonding primer, it will fall back into the container. So I just like the convenience of this. The other thing is, if you are doing any rolling, I only recommend using cabinet door and trim foam rollers. They come in a 4-inch size, which would be appropriate for rolling on this chair, or a 6-inch size, so if you've got something a little bit larger like a nightstand or a dresser. And obviously you need the roller cages that come along with the appropriate size. You can use a regular paint tray and liner. If you're doing the little small size, I love this little guy. I just can wash it off after I get finished. So those are general supplies that we're gonna need today. The other thing is, if you've done any taping like I have, I went around and just took my fingernail and just double checked that I have this webbing perfectly protected. The other thing is, you may be wondering about the wood grain and if it's gonna show through. Yeah, it is. And that's okay, because I think it's gonna give the chair a little bit more character. There's no need to fill this grain in. So if you're painting something that's got heavy graining, like an oak piece like I do, let's assume that that graining is just gonna give it a little more extra character. Okay, so what I'm gonna show you next is how to just easily open up the Candid Bonding Primer. This is called the chime of the paint can, and you are literally just going to lift up and move around. So I'm just gonna set that aside. And then the other thing is, with your stir stick, mine is actually in pretty good shape, is I just want you to stir up that bonding primer really, really well before you start applying it. I think we're gonna put about 2 to 3 inches inside this paint pail. And then what I like to do, some people will punch holes into the chime of the rim of any paint or primer that they're using. I don't like to do that because I feel like it interrupts the seal that you get when you actually put the lid back on. So I just take my stir stick and I just push the bonding primer back in. And don't close the can just yet, because you likely will need a little bit more. We are gonna take a deep breath in, let it out, because you may be feeling nervous about actually starting to apply the primer. We are gonna be using my favorite brush. Why I like it so much, especially for people with, who are beginners or have small hands, is I like the fact it's got a short handle, which makes it a whole lot easier to control. But say you bought something that's got a long handle, ignore that long handle. The way I want you to hold the brush so you can control the brush strokes as much as possible is you're gonna hold the brush actually on this metal area, and you see how I have it braced? Hopefully that makes sense. So you're gonna be able to control your brush. The other thing is, you're gonna see me vary the way I use the brush. Okay, so I'd like you to pay close attention to that. So I've got my primer in the paint pail, and we're just gonna dip and just get a little bit of primer, and we're gonna brush it off. So we don't have too much primer on our brush, okay? Because you don't want too much. Name of the game is to start out slow. And what we're gonna do is we're always gonna work top to bottom of anything, because then things can drip and you can catch them. I'm gonna turn it to the side to get it up in here. And let's talk a little bit about bonding primer. So what you wanna do with bonding primer, it's really thick and it's very forgiving. So you can see, to get up in that detail area, I'm going across, and then I'm gonna brush down like this. Bonding primer is like the super glue for your paint to be able to stick to the surface. I also talk about it like it's peanut butter between 2 pieces of bread. So it makes 2 things that normally wouldn't stick together. So I hope that concept is pretty easy. Nice thing about bonding primer, it typically only requires 1 coat, and it dries really fast in 30 minutes. The other thing about bonding primer, it's not designed to cover, it's just designed to rough up that surface, and so you likely will see some of the stain showing through. The other benefit of bonding primer is a stain blocking primer. So that means that any tannins in the wood or any of the actual stain on your furniture is not going to bleed through into the paint. And yes, that can happen. It's called tannin bleed. I always want you to keep a wet edge between areas. So you kind of go into these details, and then I want you to go back and forth, and I don't want you to brush too much. So we're going to do nice long strokes, because our whole goal is to eliminate those brush marks. And then the other thing, it's a concept called striking off. So I'm actually going to hit this real quick while I still have a little bit of primer on my brush. So I'm going to get into those little crevices. Again, not too much primer, because we don't want that to bleed underneath our tape. So this is the concept of striking off. And striking off means you run the brush when you're finished with an area in the same direction that you were painting. So what I'm going to do is run my brush, and see, this is the benefit of painter's pants. Just wipe it off. I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to strike off. So you're going to very lightly and gently run your brush in the same direction as the panel that you're painting. And then we're gonna do this because I just hit this and finish off. And that's all that is required to paint a section like that. Down into, you wanna make sure you force the primer down into, and I don't mean like push harder, I mean just keep applying. And then what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna turn my brush just a little bit right here, and I'm gonna go down that edge really lightly and gently. Because again, I don't wanna create any more brush marks than I have to. And just hit those edges just a little bit. So since I applied the bonding primer here, I'm just gonna continue. And the main thing is you wanna go in the direction of the grain that you're painting. So everything is flowing this way. It makes it easier to do nice long brush strokes. And the goal is to keep applying the primer until most of it is off your brush. The thing that I'll tell you is, when you get into areas like this, you want to have as little paint on or primer on your brush because you don't want anything to drip down into the seat or the fabric or anything that's protected. So I'm always going to make sure that there's just the lightest little bit of primer when I'm hitting these sections. Painting around feet, just make sure you do kind of the same thing where you don't have a ton of primer on your brush itself because you don't want to have a lot of drips on your just down on the floor. Now that you've finished priming your piece of furniture, you may be wondering, hey, I've got some leftover primer. What should I do with it? Yes, you can pour it right back into the can. Remember I told you to save that stir stick and to not put the lid back on super tight? So all you have to do, and this is why I like the paint pail, or if you have a plastic tray liner, you can do the same thing. And just take that stir stick, and you can see I use so little primer. And try to avoid like any dried bits, just truly put the wet primer back into the can. You may be wondering how to go ahead and reseal the primer can. What I would like you to do, because there's likely a little bit of wet primer, is just get a little paper towel. I like to use a rubber mallet, you can see, and gently tap around the chime to seal back up that primer. And then that way you can use it again. Here is the finished primed chair. I'm going to do some close-up footage here to show you exactly what the finish is supposed to look like when you get your primer applied and it starts to dry. I don't want you to be alarmed by all the little brush strokes that you see, or if you see the grain showing through, or you see the stain showing through. That is exactly how it's supposed to look. We're going to let this dry for 30 minutes at a minimum. Do not take your little fingernail or anything else and try to scratch at this surface because that's not how bonding primer works. It is not totally adhered to the surface. It is just the super glue that's going to help the paint actually stick to your stained or polyurethane piece of furniture. So we want to be baby gentle with the bonding primer because anywhere you scratch it off, if you accidentally scratch it off because you move the chair, please go ahead and touch up that area and let all of it dry again for 30 minutes because we don't want to put the paint on before the primer is actually dry. So I bet you are feeling a whole lot more confident now that you've already applied the primer to your furniture and it's fully dried and you're ready to get that beautiful paint color on there next. So the paint that I recommended for this project, specifically because it is a beginner class, is Valspar Signature. This is a satin finish. I didn't want anything that was too shiny, so I went ahead and went with a satin finish, which I think is a great medium grade sheen for painting furniture. It gives you kind of the best of both worlds where it's going to be durable enough, dry to a hard enough finish, and then also be wipeable and cleanable, which will be important when you think about the arms of a chair, which is what I'm painting. So we're going to go and review again. It's no different than with the primer. The way you open up a can of paint is you run the little metal piece along the chime. We're going to set aside the actual lid. You see this is brand new paint. The color, I'm sure you wanted to know again, is called Relaxed Navy. It's going to be so pretty. I'm going to put these chairs between my kitchen and my family room. So it's a nice color between those two spaces. The other thing is we're going to stir this up. It literally, because I picked it up at the store, was recently shaken up, so it's in pretty good shape as far as having the resin and the colorant and everything mixed up. But if you have had yours sitting around for a little while, I recommend using your stir stick and stir it up. So here we go, da 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 da. What I'm gonna have to do, because I do not wanna scrape these legs, I was kind of spinning the chair around. I'm physically gonna move my body around, which is really how you should be painting. So I apologize sometimes if I'm in front of what you wanna see. I'll make sure to do some close-ups so you can see what I'm painting, and I'll insert them as needed as we go. The cool thing is, you have already practiced by applying primer. The principles are going to be the same when you apply paint. Now the difference with the paint is, it's going to be a little bit runnier. It's going to go on a lot more smoothly. I would say the first coat of paint, and yes, we're going to be doing more than one coat, is really not going to cover everything. I would prefer you do 3 thin coats of paint, then you over apply the paint. And so as I'm applying the paint, I'll talk to you about why that is. So we're going to start in, again, the same spot as I did with the primer. I'm going to be really careful to not touch this too much. I don't want to interfere with that primer at all or scrape anything off. Ooh, this color is so pretty. So again, you're moving in the same motion. Now, unlike the primer, paint will drip. And we are all going to become drip police. Yes, drip police. You're going to always keep a watch for any time the paint might be dripping. And we're going to do the same thing where we're applying in long, even brush strokes. And you can see this is a high quality paint. It's why I recommend it, especially in a dark color, because it applies so beautifully, and it's really a high quality paint with a lot of titanium dioxide. Yes, I learned how to make this paint when I was working for Valspar for 5 years and training people in the Lewis Paint Department about all of the wonderful products that we manufactured. So again, I'm going to use the same motions and tap paint because I don't want to over apply, especially down where I have these areas taped. I'm just going to gently tap it down in there, and then we're going to brush up. Now, the reason we don't want to over apply paint, and until I get that brush fully loaded, I'm going to keep adding paint. Why we don't want to over apply the paint, there's this concept called blocking, where if the paint doesn't fully dry between coats of paint, it ends up sticking to itself and never ever fully dries. So by over applying the paint, it's going to take much longer to dry, and just by doing thin coats, you're going to avoid any problems going forward. So you see how easy this is? I'm going to go up this side. So again, you can see a little bit of this wood grain showing through. While my brush is still wet, we're going to strike off in one direction to make sure we eliminate those brush strokes. And then we're going to move to the next section. So now I'm going to focus on doing the arms. And this is where it's a little harder. That paint may drip, but we're just going to keep an eye and watch out for it. Valspar Signature is really nice. I'd say like a nice thickness of paint. It's not too runny. So it's a whole lot easier to control. If you are someone who has been taking my tutorials before or just read my blog before, you know that my favorite paint is Valspar cabinet and furniture enamel. That is a completely different type of paint. It applies totally differently. So this is much easier to control, and why I recommend it for a beginner course. Because once you get confident with this type of paint, it'll be much easier to paint with an alkyd oil enamel, which is a hybrid type of paint. So let's talk about recoat time. Recoat time is the amount of time between coats of paint. That is very different than dry time. Dry time is how long it actually takes the paint to totally dry and cure. That's usually 7 days, friends. Paint does not fully dry, usually between 5 and 7 days, where it gets to its full hardness, and you are safe to use the furniture. So I would say you need to really baby your furniture until the paint is fully dry. Whenever you see drips, handle them right away. I can see little areas where the primer is kind of showing through, but we want to leave that alone. The less you manipulate the paint, the less brush strokes you are going to have. You want to know how long the recoat time is? Do not add another coat of paint for 2 hours, okay? Once you get done with your furniture, wait 2 hours before you apply another coat of paint. I want to get in your face about that. Something that I forgot to mention about paint and paint color is when you start applying the paint, it's going to look a lot lighter than the actual color when it dries. So don't be surprised if when you first start applying the paint and you feel like, oh no, that's not the right color. It's the right color, it will dry to the right color, because I can already see little areas of my chair starting to dry, and it just made me think about that. Just saw a little drip and a little sagging. You just want to make sure while the paint is wet, you handle all those little areas of concern from dripping to sagging while your paintbrush is wet and while the paint on the chair or piece of furniture is wet. If you have just loaded your brush, do not tap the paint into any area that you're scared it might run underneath, because you literally have too much paint on the brush itself. So I want you to look for long expanses that you can get some of that paint off of your brush and let the brush get a little bit drier before you hit some of those areas. Stand up, walk around your furniture. Look to see that every single surface has been coated, but you can see, don't keep applying the paint. Don't keep applying the paint, okay? Just get it on, strike it off, and keep on moving. The concept of sagging paint. So if you over apply in an area like this, you literally will start seeing the paint like glopping down. And what I want you to do is to always make sure, if you see that you strike off and you pull that paint down to avoid that sagging. Do not over apply the paint. Your first coat is not designed to cover, okay? Your first coat is not designed to cover. It's just to get the base coat started. So I can see a lot of white showing through, and really, frankly, you should too. That means you did it the right way. Look at that! Already done with our first coat of paint. Isn't that amazing? Now, a little trick that I want to teach you, and hopefully you have a piece of furniture that you can actually move just slightly, or you have a way to move it, is I want you to adjust the piece of furniture just slightly so you don't have to worry about the furniture, actually the paint dripping down and it sticking to the cardboard. So always just shift your furniture slightly while you allow this to dry. And how long are we going to let it dry, folks? 2 hours before we recoat it. And I'm going to show you a little trick for preserving your paintbrush in between coats so you don't have to rinse it out.
All right, so this is a really easy tip. You can use plastic saran wrap or painter's plastic and cover over your roller and wrap your brush, plus cover the paint in your tray and store that between 4 and 6 hours, and it'll be perfect and ready to use the next time you want to paint.
Welcome back to the second coat of paint. You've let your paint dry for 2 hours. And you may be looking at it feeling concerned because you're seeing primer popping through the paint, or maybe it looks like you have brush marks. That's the first coat. Literally, you don't want it to apply so heavily that you don't see the primer. You're going to be surprised that this second coat is going to cover so beautifully. It's going to go on so much more smoothly than any of the things that we've applied to date. And if you haven't done any taping off or anything, this really is your final step in the paint challenge. So that's pretty exciting. I have my paint prepared. Again, we're using the same brush. I have a zillion of these. Obviously, the paint technique really is not going to change. All that is going to happen is the paint's going to go on a whole lot easier. So being the drip release is even more important on the second day because it's going to go on so much more smoothly. And you can see I'm starting in the same area that I started every other day. This is such an important piece of the chair that I want to make sure I get it perfect. But what I'm excited about is I believe this is only going to take 2 coats of paint and not 3. And that really is the difference of having a high quality paint, is you only have to apply a couple coats because it's so thick and the colorant in there is so good. Something I also want to mention that I did is I went around and I pulled the tape away from all these areas. I think I'm going to have some problems, but I'm going to use a little craft brush after I take off the tape to fix everything. Normally, I would recommend taking tape off while the paint was wet on the first coat and then retaping. I just didn't want to go through the process of doing that, and I would rather go ahead and touch up in this particular circumstance. But what I am going to do is while the paint is wet, I will remove the tape. So it's going to be a dicey situation, and I of course will film it so you can see exactly what I do. We're always going to work top to bottom, so you start at the top of your furniture and you work your way down, and we're always going to do those long brush strokes after we do short brush strokes. So we make sure that we strike off and we get that paint running in the same direction. It helps the paint flow and level into position. So I've completely finished painting this chair. I would say that took me all of 10 to 15 minutes, if that. I'm not even sure, but it went really, really fast. The main thing is this is your inspection point where I want you to walk around your piece of furniture. I want you to bend over. I want you to look at it from every angle possible just to make sure you don't see any drips, you don't see any sagging, and you don't see any like serious areas that you've missed. Oh, look, I see a drip. It happens. Okay, so here's a drip coming down, and all I'm gonna do, my paintbrush is still wet, so it's a good time to handle that. Just lightly knock it down. So I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna walk around, look at my chair, see if there's any drips, and if there are, I'm gonna fix them, and then leave it alone. And how long are we gonna let this dry, right? Because this is a second coat of paint. So this is really important. The longer the better when it comes to dry time. I literally will likely let this dry overnight before I put it back into use. Like I won't be sitting in it. I'll put it back, because I can literally pick it up by the seat. I'll put it back in my family room to dry, so it's drying in air conditioning and fully curing. So it takes 7 days for the paint to fully cure. So I'm not gonna use this chair at all or let anybody sit in it for a little bit. Now for me comes the really hard part, which is removing this tape and all this plastic. So I'm gonna be very focused on everything that I'm doing, and I may not talk very much, but what I want you to see that I'm doing is I'm going to do everything in my power to remove the tape at a 90-degree angle and keep a clean edge as I peel it back. The other thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull everything and push it back into the center of the chair, because I don't want any of this wet paint, yeah, it's still wet, to get on the seat itself. So I'm gonna go very slowly and very methodically, and as I encounter issues, I will let you know, but I'm gonna start underneath first. So see, I'm pulling it directly up, and then I'm gonna pull it back. Ooh. This one so far so good. And then straight back. And I'm rolling all this together. Just be very gentle. Okay, now I'm gonna work on this side, and this one you'll be able to see me pull it. I'm literally gonna reach back through so I can just keep this very clean edge. Looks good. Okay, so I hope that helps you. You can see I've got a nice clean finish. I see a little bit of primer right here. So say you have a little primer of white showing through, you are literally going to put the tiniest amount of paint. And well, first of all, you're going to retape that area, put the tiniest amount of paint on a craft brush and tap in to cover up that white. Got the same issue on this side. So we're going to do the same thing, and we're just going to tap that just like that to cover up the white. Here is my finished product, and I absolutely love the color with the seat. I think it looks so much better than that orangey brown stain, and I couldn't be more thrilled. So thanks for your time with me. And
Hey, now that we're friends, please hit that like button, subscribe, and make sure you check that notification bell so when I release brand new paint tutorials or fun and helpful advice on decorating, you'll be the first to know.